Nick, may you lead us in prayer.
In the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Our Father, who art in heaven,
hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil.
So good evening, everyone. Okay, so some of us who don't have notes, I am not so sure that Jose is coming, but when he comes, then we'll have the notes. Okay? Sorry. Okay, so just to recap what we looked at last week. Remember that we have now the issue of our lives, as we said, is about worship of God. And as we said, that worship is what God created us for, because when we worship, we give glory to God. Okay? Glorify with our lives. That is the reason God created you and me to glorify Him with our lives. And worship, adoration, worship is that act of worshiping Him. And we said that worship of God is always in the context of what we call liturgy. Okay? Because liturgy is basically worship. And we said that the pattern of our liturgy, worshiping God, is not something we concoct from here below, but it is revealed by God. So liturgy or worship is God's gift to us. And so we saw the tension between what we may call the word, whatever is opposite to God, and basically the true worship of God. So we saw the struggle, the tension between Pharaoh and Moses. Okay. Pharaoh wants Moses basically to look at Pharaoh as God. So Pharaoh presents himself as God. So if your God instructs you to do something, well, Pharaoh will also instruct you to do something. And so that's the tension. Let my people go to, where are they going? They are going to the wilderness, the desert, to do what? To worship God. Let my people go to worship me, because that's what I created them for. And the Pharaoh, basically, we are going to see now how Pharaoh resists what the message of God is. God is saying people should worship me. Pharaoh is saying no, people should basically worship me. They should take instructions from me. And so that tension goes on, and we said, it's very important, that Pharaoh and Moses do not lie in the past. Just as the Exodus is a perennial event in our lives, so is Pharaoh and Moses. So they are modern figures of Pharaoh. And the Pharaoh takes, two forms, major forms. So many forms, but two major forms. There is a Pharaoh, we may call it an outright denial of God. Like the Pharaoh of Egypt. He says right away, there's no God except me, except Pharaoh. Or there is a Pharaoh who religious institutions. Okay? Basically, to do what he or she wants, this Pharaoh, but he hides behind religious institutions. This Pharaoh, they are both dangerous. But as we see in Jesus, and what it says, this Pharaoh is more dangerous than this one in a sense. That you remember when Jesus said that prostitutes and tax collectors are basically entering the kingdom of God before you. Referring to the Pharisees who were hiding behind religious institutions, okay, and lip service to God, but their hearts were very far away from God. Of course, the prophets talks about these people all through the Old Testament. So this Pharaoh is very dangerous because he's under the guise that he already has God. He already believes. So he doesn't need conversion. He doesn't need a change of life because I already have it. Whereas those other people who are not under that delusion that there is a God, maybe there is a certain level of openness because they say, I don't have it. So he said, this is again very important to remember, that both these pharaohs, what they do is to provide a, what we call a framework of compromise, to concede. So this Pharaoh we saw the other time, providing a framework whereby we don't really, okay, we have religion, I'm not going to fight your religion, but now this is the way you are to live as religious people in my kingdom. And so this Pharaoh gives you guidelines on how to do it. And so if you want to live kind of religious life, okay, live your life, religious life in your temples, in your whatever mosques, in your churches, but when you come in the public, don't talk about your God. Because your God is conflicting and confusing and whatever, so we want God outside, it's out of the public square, out of the public life. We don't want him there. So he's providing a framework for you to worship. You listen to him rather than listening to your God. This Pharaoh here also provides a framework of compromise, but it is very subtle and it can be very confusing. This is where you have so-called religious people who are so ideological, entrenched in some of their ideologies, like a conservatism or liberalism, okay? But here let's talk about conservatism, okay? That basically to be a conservative is more important than to listen to God. So the Pharisee, their Pharisaic way of seeing things, okay, which is basically, as Jesus says, a pagan way, is more important than what Jesus Christ is revealing to them. Okay? They think they see. Remember the story of the blind man. And Jesus says, well, if you are blind, you wouldn't have any guilt, any problem. But you say you see, your sin remains. Because you see from an all-human point of view and refuse to see from God's point of view. And from seeing your human point of view, you promote and present that seeing as God's seeing. So you see there is no fundamental difference between this Pharaoh and this Pharaoh. Because the point of departure is the same, their own way of thinking. Not what God is revealing to them. And so oftentimes we are duped by people who come to us and say, well, God, you should talk about God. You should talk about, Christmas. Okay? We can now say Christmas or whatever. Well, you can say things, but I will look at what you do. You can talk about God any way you want. But the God you're talking about may be yourself, not the God of Jesus Christ. Oftentimes you're duped by politicians who say God, and people say, well, at least she talks about God. He talks about God. What kind of God is he talking about? Is it the God of Jesus Christ or the God who is himself providing their own framework, hiding behind religion or a particular kind of faith? So this Pharaoh can be very dangerous because they present themselves as believing in God. But in actual fact, they don't believe. So we have to be constantly on guard, okay, against these pharaohs. Okay. And not that rejection of God, fighting God in the public square, or this one who hides behind God and faith, when in actual fact it's an empty shell. So we have to hear what you do and what you say. Is it in line with what God is offering to us? What God has revealed, or what you think should be followed? Is it an ideology or faith? You see, many people like today in our day and age, you have people, okay, on like both spectrums of what I'm talking about here. You have some people who say, for example, the so-called social issues of our time, but they're not really social issues, okay? They are essentially human, fundamental, moral, spiritual issues, not simply social issues. So you talk about people who say that they care about life. So just think about the dichotomy here, or the way people look at rights. Okay? So some people will tell you, okay, from one spectrum, okay, end of the spectrum, that my right to whatever I want to do is sacrosanct, okay, sacred to me. You don't touch my rights, okay. So, for example, my right to abortion is the law of the land, okay. So don't trample upon my civil rights, okay. That person can be a denier of God, or can be a Catholic pretending to believe, but now the law of the land supersedes the moral law, the law of God. Okay? So I have to really examine myself, okay, what is more important to me? An ideology or truth as it is revealed to me by God? So I can hide behind an ideology. Well, that's the law of the land. It's legal. Is it moral? Is it human? Is it reasonable? Then you can see people who will criticize such people, okay? That, they are stupid, they are whatever, they are unreasonable, they are foolish. And probably I think that's true, okay? They are foolish. But then, that person can be on the other extreme and tells you that to touch my right to have guns is sacrosanctum. It's like a law revealed by God that there thou shalt have the Second Amendment. Okay? So don't touch it. This is the same person who is criticizing the other people for exalting their rights over and above God. Then you can sit down and ask yourself, what am I doing on the other end of the spectrum? Is the Second Amendment, the way I understand it, more important than the law of charity? What does the law of charity require of me under these circumstances? So am I listening to Pharaoh or to God? I'm very passionate about these things, okay? I'm conservative first and Catholic second. I'm a liberal first and a Catholic second. Although people don't say it that way. But you can see it in what they do. The choices we make. How entrenched we are, okay, in our human ideologies. And how shallow sometimes we are in our faith. So what is more important? The ideologies we have created for ourselves, which will end with death, or the truth that can help me to live forever, to glorify my God forever. So that is the tension, okay, between God and Pharaoh, constantly. But Pharaoh can come in different forms. God always comes in one form. It's called the truth. Pharaoh too comes with the form. The form is always truth, goodness, happiness, whatever. But always Pharaoh is someone who is empowering you. Okay? So it comes under that, guys, you have to be empowered. So there is power in your right as a woman over your body. There is power in holding an AR-15. It's about you're empowered. But what kind of power is this? What is the empowerment that is being given to me? Is it real power? Or is it weakness disguising itself as power? Where does real power lie? True power lie? It lies in goodness, it lies in truth. Okay, so we have to really be very shrewd, okay? So, in looking at the tension between Pharaoh and God, and Moses, the messenger of God, let's look at Exodus chapter 10, okay? Some of the excerpts from that chapter. We're not reading the whole chapter. So I'm asking you to read along, okay, as we go through this Exodus. As we said before, no one can understand worship without understanding the book of Exodus. We cannot understand worship and liturgy. So that's why we are looking at it with the help of the insights of Pope Benedict.
I don't have a book.
Yes, and Jose is not here. But
I'm sharing right now.
yes, we'll get, get the book. So the Bible, Exodus chapter 10. So we'll just say the excerpts, okay? Let's look at, let's go to verse. So chapter 10 is the 8th plague, okay? And so these plagues were meant to basically make Pharaoh realize that God is serious. But Pharaoh is saying, no sir. Okay? So remember that God is giving, this is the idea, giving Moses the totality of truth. And what Pharaoh is trying to do is to make Moses concede truth, compromise truth. Pharaoh is trying to build up a structure, okay, of compromise. In which case, when you compromise, you are no longer listening to the God of Moses, but to Pharaoh as your God. So, chapter 10, let's go to verse 24. Okay. So God sent locusts and whatever to destroy the land. Then verse 24. Pharaoh then summoned Moses and Aaron. Who was older, Moses or Aaron?
Aaron.
Aaron. Okay. And said, go serve the Lord. So because of the difficulties, because of the plagues, Pharaoh is willing to concede something. And by conceding something, he's telling Moses to do the same as well. Okay, Moses, I have made concessions. Now, follow my lead. Concede something. What is the reply of Moses? So, Pharaoh then summoned Moses and Aaron and said, go serve the Lord, okay? Go, okay, serve your God. Only your flocks and herds will be detained. So at first, he said, leave the children behind. Okay? So then Moses says, no, I'm not doing that. Okay? So I am taking everything. Now Pharaoh considers and says, okay, go and herds will be detained. Only the herds, like the animals and everything, will be detained. You take your wives and your children and everything. Even your little ones may go with you. Okay? You know, I don't want your God to do things to me. But Moses replied, this is very important. You also must give us sacrifices and burnt offerings to make to the Lord our God. Meaning, we must take our animals with us. Why? Our livestock also must go with us. Not an animal must be left behind. For some of them we will select for service to the Lord, meaning we will sacrifice to the Lord our God. But we will not know with which ones we are to serve the Lord until we arrive there. Okay? Meaning that if you have the totality of truth and you allow Pharaoh to chip away on truth, then you don't know with which truth God is going to ask you to serve Him. So you have already conceded that truth, and so you are no longer in position to serve your God, because you have conceded the truth. So Moses, being a courageous leader, like Peter 2 later on, he says, you tell me, should I obey you, O God? I am going to stand strong and obey my God. So because we don't know with which we will serve the Lord. So if we go to the desert, the wilderness, and God says, okay, serve me with that one I told you to bring. Well, we left it in Egypt because we were afraid of Pharaoh. Okay? So, fear of Pharaoh is more important over than obeying God. Jesus says, you are not worthy of me. Whoever is afraid, whoever fears to witness to me is not worthy of me. We don't know with which we will serve the Lord. I think you remember what we said about the story which circulates among, it has been around for some time. A man was given a cross to carry. Okay? The cross is basically truth. And then it was so heavy, he chopped off basically a piece. Then it became lighter. Then he got to a place where he was going, but there was a river to cross. And the cross that was given to him was the right size to lay over the river, to cross and then pull the cross. Okay? After crossing. But the cross wouldn't fit anymore. So he couldn't cross over. Okay? So truth must never be conceded. And so we have leaders today who are courageous enough, like Moses, who will not concede the truth. No matter what Pharaoh, whichever Pharaoh comes their way, and whichever basically framework of compromise Pharaoh presents. And we have, unfortunately, some leaders who are cowards, who will cower when Pharaoh speaks. Okay? Because Pharaoh is going to squeeze the pockets, our funds. So what should we do? We go to Pharaoh, kneel and beg for food. Because we believe that God can provide. But God indeed can provide. As we see in the desert when they complained that, well, in Egypt you ate, flesh and whatever, parts of, meat, and here in the desert we are languishing. That's a constant temptation. Okay. Moses, the leader, didn't tell people, you know what? I think this is not working out. Let's go back. Moses didn't do that. But unfortunately, some leaders in the church have done that. But thank God many, stand for the truth and move forward. Because even in periods of dryness, like in the desert, we must still believe that God will provide. We see that from courageous leaders of the way, from the man who was sacrificing Isaac. His name was Abraham, our father in faith. He hoped against the hope. Okay? So that is what we are looking at now. Okay. So paragraph 4, the first page, let's revise that. The same command is repeated in Exodus chapter 9 verses 1 and verses 13, and in chapter 10 verses 3. Let my people go to serve me is the command given by God to the Hebrews, to Pharaoh. We hear Pharaoh conceding halfway, telling the Hebrews to, okay, go, sacrifice to your God in the wilderness, provided that you do not go too far away. I still have to have control over you, meaning go to the desert, but the desert of Egypt. Okay, my territory. So in other words, they can sacrifice to their God in the land of Egypt, meaning bondage in slavery in sin. So Pharaoh seems to imply. But Moses insists, in obedience to God's command, that they must go. They must leave Egypt in order to worship. They must go to the wilderness just as God had commanded, not as Pharaoh wants. They will go contrary to Pharaoh's wishes, with their young and old, with their sons and daughters, and with their flocks. So it is a pilgrimage feast of the Lord for them. Moses cannot negotiate about the liturgy. He cannot concede truth, nor can he subject worship to any form of political compromise. Read that from the Spirit of the Liturgy, page 16. I told you that book, about that book. This is the book, The Spirit of the Liturgy by Pope Benedict. Very important book. Okay? So, Moses cannot negotiate about the liturgy, nor can he subject worship to any form of political compromise. That is Moses. You hear in some countries whereby some churches are held hostage because of tax exemption. Okay? So we have to really examine that. Okay? So what are we giving concessions that we can't talk about certain truth because Pharaoh may take away money. So, however difficult it may seem, Jesus tells us you cannot serve both God and mammon. Okay? So, the manner in which God is to be worshipped is not a question of political feasibility, expediency. Because it's not an ideology. It contains its measure within itself. That is the meaning of truth. Truth, the measure of truth is not from without. It's from within itself. In other words, truth is not truth. Truth doesn't demand what it says because of what I think about it or what I perceive it to be. Its measure is within itself. Either I agree with truth in itself as it measures itself, or I disagree with it. There is no in-between. So, truth contains its measure within itself. That is, it can only be ordered by the measure of revelation, in dependency upon God who reveals it. Not what I think about it. Well, this is between me and my God. This is how I think about it. This is my take on what the church teaches. My take. Well, we know who constantly refers to my take. He appeared in the Garden of Eden, symbolically. Did God really say? Oh no, my take on this is... And then because his take on this is seemingly attractive, so some of us follow. Okay? So all the compromises suggested by Pharaoh concerning the worship of God are flatly rejected by Moses. We must go with everything God has commanded me to take because we do not know with which ones we are to serve the Lord until we arrive there. If we compromise truth, we don't know the challenges of tomorrow. What if the challenge of tomorrow requires the truth we have compromised it today. How are we going to meet that challenge? Okay. So, we can't fall for these traps, because when you fall for one trap, know that there are 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 ahead of you. And if you fall in one trap, you're going to fall into the other traps as well. So the issue at stake is worship. Remember, we said that worship is so important because that's the only thing we will be doing in eternity. That's the work of the saints and the angels, to worship God. They don't do anything else. They don't go shopping. Okay. They worship God. So the issue at stake is worship. This worship can only take place according to God's measure. As we're going to see later on when we get deeper into this liturgical action mass, we see that our liturgy is revealed. Worship is a gift we receive from God. We don't concoct the way we worship God. We don't manipulate our God. He's not a pagan God who doesn't exist. A God who we project onto our thinking. God tells, I'm not like you. I don't think like you. My thinking, my ways are far removed from yours, as the heavens are removed from the earth. I don't think like you. Okay? So oftentimes we project our way of looking at things onto God, whereas it should be the other way around. God to assist us see from our point of view. In our day and age, where culture is, it's so funny that in our day and age we talk so much about culture, when seemingly we are losing culture. We are losing philosophy, culture in essence. But however much we emphasize culture are human philosophies, which always need constant purification. And it's the light of divine revelation that will purify our cultures. Okay? Truth is the constant that will always assist us to pull us out of our darkness, out of our misguided thinking. Without the truth, the so-called advancement of culture turns to total chaos. Okay? So we have also to we will be looking at that as we go along. So worship can only take place according to God's measure. Therefore, the Hebrews depart not in order to be a people like all other people, all the others. In other words, you are not called by God to be like everyone else, everybody else. They depart in order to serve God. Their serving is their salvation, as we one saint put it, to serve God is to be saved by Him. So whenever we talk about service of God, it's not like God is a despot, in need of people to serve Him. He's looking around, are you doing it right? What about you? No. It is for our own good. The gift of worship is our salvation. To serve God is for us to be saved, okay, so that our glory may shine. As St. Irenaeus says, the glory of God is the life of man. And the life of man is, the glory of God is man alive, the life of man. That's the glory of God. And the life of man, so the glory of God is man alive. Okay, the life of man. And the life of man is the vision of God. Okay, the vision of God. Okay? So that is what we mean by serving God. So when they arrive at the mountain of the Lord, what is that mountain? Horeb, Sinai. Okay? So please read those chapters, Exodus 19 to 24. They are very, very important chapters. Okay? So as we study this, read along. Okay, read the Bible. So that we don't study about the Bible, okay? Without reading. Okay? So read those chapters. So God speaks to his people and makes known his will in the Ten Commandments through the mediation of Moses. Okay, he makes a covenant with them. This section is very, very important. Let's first summarize the essence of what we are looking at. So God basically calls his people out of, or delivers his people out of bondage, out of slavery, out of darkness, out of Egypt. These are geographical locations, but they have a theological meaning. So, you leave Egypt, which is a symbol of sin, bondage, slavery. Okay? Please, it doesn't mean that whenever you encounter an Egyptian, tell him sin. Okay? These are symbolic realities, biblical realities, they are symbolic. Okay? Egypt is a symbol of all these things. So, how do we leave Egypt? By the Exodus. From Exodus, three things ensue, proceed, take place. Number one is, that's where we are arriving, covenant relationship. Covenant means communion of life. So God enters into covenant with his people to give them life. Okay? And the life he gives to them, he wants that life to be preserved. They are preserved. Covenant makes them a people. A people who are alive to their God. Okay? So that's the meaning. You are made up of people. But that covenant is not meant to be transient or temporary. It's meant to be permanent. And so, he gives them the Torah. The purpose of Torah is to preserve the covenant community. So, Torah, what is Torah? Usually Torah, we translate it as law, but the proper translation is divine instruction, which we call law. Law, as we know, sometimes has negative connotations. You broke the law. It makes God like, a police officer. You see, these are, I think those who drive, who ride in big, the cars, police cars, sometimes they're a little bit forgiving, that the motorcycle ones, they never forgive. No matter how much you played. I don't know whether they are the less experienced one, I don't know. But when the motorcycle is behind you, and you're done.
Do you know, or does the Catholic Church have an opinion on which pharaoh?
I think it's Ramses the third. Most likely that's the one, the pharaoh. So, the covenant, communion of life and love and whatever, then the Torah, divine instruction. The importance of instruction is that God is giving you direction, is leading you. Okay? So, the divine instructions are made to preserve you in life, not to harass you. So, the law of God, that's why this psalm, a long, long psalm, okay? Psalm, it's the longest psalm in the Bible. It's very long, look at it. It's praising the law of God. So the law of God is never like something oppressive. But it is something that frees us. Are you there? So you see how long that psalm is. Goes on and on and on. But all in place of God's law, the Word of God. So it has 176 verses.
How many?
176 verses. It has a beautiful verse. Verse 105. What does it say? Verse 105. So that's how we walk with God. Okay? So now the covenant must be celebrated. But the way we celebrate covenant is by way of life, as we're going to see. Torah is a way of life to preserve us. In other words, Torah is not something we just have in the head, but we live it. It's a way of life. And so how do we express our way of life? In worship. So that is the fruit of the Exodus. Covenant, Torah. When you read Psalm 105, 119, okay, that psalm, and of course in the other text which talks about the law of God, you recognize that the Hebrews never understood God's law, Torah, as a burden, as something curtailing our freedom. They always understood Torah as gift. So God's law, divine instruction, is a gift to preserve us eternally. So they cherished, they loved Torah. So the Ten Commandments are not something to curtail our freedom, but to free us for love, to free us for life. So whenever you hear, like for example in the New Testament, okay, you hear St. Paul talking about the law. The law cannot save you, the law. He's not talking about divine instruction in that sense. We have always to be mindful of this fact, that in the Old Testament, we have three types of precepts. We have the moral precepts, okay, laws. Number two, we have the legal precepts. Number three, we have the liturgical precepts. So these two, legal and liturgical, were provisional. You have always to be aware of them. They were provisional. That's why you notice that the church cannot demand that the US, as a country, we govern ourselves as Israel did in their legal precepts. Because they were provisional for Israel as a nation. Of course, legal precepts are very important because they must be at the service of the moral precepts to preserve covenant community. That's why the church teaches that law, human law, should be and must be an ordinance of reason. It must be reasonable because it's there to preserve us, to assist us serve God. Okay? But these legal precepts were provisional. So, some of the Pharisees, some schools of the Pharisees and the scribes had turned these precepts as if they are equal to moral precepts. So this is what Jesus says, you hold on to your customs, okay, as if they are divinely revealed, and you despise God's law. So when St. Paul talks about the law not being, cannot save you or whatever, he's not talking about the moral law. He's not talking about the Ten Commandments. Because Jesus himself reiterated the importance of the Ten Commandments. When the rich young man came to him, what shall I do to inherit the kingdom of heaven? The response of Jesus was to reiterate the Ten Commandments. And then the young man said, okay, I've done all that. Then Jesus says, okay, you've done it, you know it, now practice it. Sell everything and follow me. I'm like, oh, well. Okay? So, this idea that Jesus did away with the Old Testament, the Ten Commandments, and gave us the new commandment of love of God and neighbor is simply foolish. Because the Ten Commandments are about love of God and neighbor. The first 3 are about the love of God. The last 7 are about love of neighbor. So for one to say that Jesus did away with those, whatever the 10 commandments and gave us the new law of love, means that someone doesn't have any clue as to what they're talking about. Jesus said, I came to not to abolish, but to fulfill. Why? Because the moral law hasn't been basically clearly understood, and folks, there was some abuses. So now I give you the fullest meaning and the fullest expression of the moral law. He gives that in summary, in the Sermon on the Mount, summarized in Matthew chapters 5 and 7. You were told, but I tell you. It's not like he's doing away with the 10 commandments, the law of God. If he did away with the 10 commandments, the moral law, he would be doing away with himself, because he is the word of God. He is the law. So whenever we hear in the New Testament talking about the law cannot save or whatever, it's in terms of these provisional laws, not the moral law. Okay? Jesus is the word. So when he talks about the scriptures, like that story, when he drew near to the disciples who were going to Emmaus, we are told, beginning with Moses and the prophets, he interpreted to them whatever referred to him in the scriptures, referring to the Old Testament. Okay? So it's very important always to be mindful of that. So whenever we talk about the Torah it says as divine instruction, of course these legal liturgical instructions also came from God, but for a provisional purpose. Okay? Because when you have the liturgy revealed by Jesus Christ on its fullness on Holy Thursday, do this, so we no longer sacrifice animals, because he has given us the sacrifice of the new covenant. So the sacrifice of animals, the blood of animals, were symbols, types, provisionally to until the coming of the fullness of worship. So we no longer basically sacrifice animals, but as we're going to see, the way the liturgy of Israel developed, okay, there are so many elements that were retained by Christians because they had abiding value, because they were revealed by God. And so our liturgy of the New Testament doesn't drop from heaven just like that. It's within the context of the liturgy, the worship of Israel, which was basically guided by the Holy Spirit, that today we still have the Psalms. Okay? These prayers are guided by the Holy Spirit. Otherwise we would have done away with them, but we don't. So it was within the context of the liturgy of Israel, which was revealed by God to prepare for the fullness of liturgy, that Jesus Christ institutes the new Passover, the real Passover. But we cannot understand the Passover of Jesus without understanding the Passover of the Jews. Okay? So these, yes, they were provisional, but they have some abiding aspects which we take over as Christians, as we will see later on. Okay? So this is in summary what we are looking at in this next section here. To know the purpose of worship, the Exodus. We left